20 June. I'm WESH 2 meteorologist Eric Burris.
And I'm WJCL 22 Chief Meteorologist Jeremy Nelson in Savannah.
All right, so Jeremy, we've had some things since we last chatted on tracking the tropics. We had a couple of named tropical systems. Thankfully, no major impacts, but it's a good reminder that hurricane season has definitely kicked off and is now rolling down the highway.
Yeah, and we're going to get into all the numbers, but definitely a little bit busier to start off the 2023 season than what we've had here last year at this time. So we'll break that down, but I think you're going to start with kind of the remnants of Cindy, and then we'll be watching it to see if it would happen to try to reform.
Yeah, so here's the latest satellite imagery. It doesn't look very good at all, which, we are certainly always going to cheer on. It's not generating any kind of massive wind load or wave action. And interestingly enough, the same batch of wind shear that sheared apart Brett in the Caribbean lifted up and moved its way over to Cindy and completely tore this thing apart.
Yeah, so you can kind of see that, how it's all disjointed and there's not really any type of circulation with it, just a cloud mass, some showers and thunderstorms out there. And it's going to start moving, it's going to get picked up and start moving a little more due north. So there could be some showers or thunderstorms near Bermuda. And overall, the chance of this redeveloping, and if it would keep the remnants and then reform, it would be Cindy once again. So it's just a 30% chance of that. And Eric and I have been talking, and the model's actually been trending not quite as impressive. We'll see maybe if this would happen to try to get going late in the game in the North Atlantic.
Yeah, but again, like you had mentioned, the models are less and less excited about any kind of development. Here's a look at the intensity models. Earlier, right as it started to fade, and it was still a tropical storm at this point, Jeremy, but the models were kind of showing it weakening and then coming back again as the wind shear lessened. But it seems like even though it's moving into waters that are still marginally warm enough, the wind shear really tore apart its core. It's still there, but there's really only one model that tries to bring it back up to tropical storm intensity as it treks up to the Canadian Maritimes.
Yeah, so probably not much of a concern or zero concern for anyone along our East Coast. Obviously, that maritime area of Canada can get hit pretty hard by some of these systems, but at the moment, we're not even sure if this would get renamed. So low concern with this one, but all the systems we've had so far has put our ACE score above average. Last year, we were so far below average, running through better part of the peak of the season. We didn't get things going really till September, but now we're approaching an ACE of 10. So that is accumulated cyclone energy. The average is 2.1. We should not have a lot of ACE in here so far early in the season. And if you compare this to last year, it was running a little bit below average. But the number that you see there, that 9.8, that's more typical of very late July.
Right. ACE, essentially, just think of it as like the overall score, the accumulated energy that has been expelled. So it's kind of interesting because last year we were talking so much about how quiet the season was and how the ACE was so low. But here we are, we're well over where we typically find ourselves this time of year. And it's not only due to having the systems that we tracked this past week, but we have now had a total of 4 named storms this year, the 2023 calendar year. 4 named storms so far. We had the January, and then of course we had Arlene, Brett, and Cindy. They weren't very powerful, but they were able to tally up some ACE points. The average for today's date over the 30-year stretch, Jeremy, is 1.1 storms, and last year we had 1 storm. So there again, another metric with a very busy start to the 2023 hurricane season.
And then last year, if you remember, we had a very late June system. We had Colin develop just before the 4th of July, early in July. So we were like, wow, we're at 3. And then it really shut down, not much going on. And then we had in August with no name storms. So We'll see how things go here. And in just a moment, we'll preview some of our thoughts for July.
Right. But it's important to just note that while we're watching the remnants there of Cindy, The good news, at least in terms of the overall picture, is that there's really nothing else to see here in the tropical Atlantic, Jeremy. Of course, the one big feature is going to be the remnants of Cindy located out in here, but that's it. This area down here is completely unorganized, not wanting to do anything. Some other little waves rolling off the coast of Africa, but for now, even though the water temperatures are plenty warm, there's nothing else at least trying to develop in the next couple of days.
And I know we talked about it a lot the last time, that MDR or main development region in that central part of the Atlantic, that was so busy. So it appears that there is one part of our cycling pattern that we talk about so often that's going to be kind of busy for that area.
Yeah.
Maybe we just kind of see a little bit of a lull there. And when we talk about July coming up here in just a moment, we're really going to be focused on maybe more the western half of the Atlantic.
Yeah.
And a little bit closer in to parts of the coast of the U.S.
Which is a very normal, that's a very normal thing, right? When we look at the month of July, these are the typical formation areas. You've got the Caribbean, the Gulf of Mexico, the extreme western Atlantic, whether it be out near the Antilles, the Lesser Antilles, or back over toward the Florida, South Carolina, Georgia coastline there. But that's the normal areas that we see development, and that's also, frankly, where we're watching, as you'd mentioned, in our long-range forecast.
Yeah, and some of those favored tracks, will we see much in the Caribbean? That's not really one of our main areas of focus, but I would say maybe the eastern half of the Gulf of Mexico, and then especially you start getting North Puerto Rico, more like Bahamas, and then Bermuda area towards the western Atlantic. That's something we'll be watching as we go into July.
Yeah. All right, so shall we look at the long-range forecast then?
Sure, and then if anyone has questions along the way, definitely drop those down anywhere that you're watching. Again, we're on Twitter, Facebook, our Facebook pages. I know my station on WJCL.com, we usually stream this live each and every week. So lots of places. And then Eric's always awesome. You drop it. You can mention this now about it's available in some podcast locations.
It is, yeah. So we've got, and it's one of those neat things that if you happen to miss it, or if you want to catch it back in the car, we're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, all these fancy places that the kids are using nowadays. Let's face it, with tropics becoming more and more of a discussion point heading into the peak of hurricane season, we're going to be adding special editions as is needed. Right now it's still kind of fairly quiet part of the pattern, but I do think we are going to start to get a little more active. So here's a look at our WJCL WESH 2 hurricane season forecast for the next few weeks. And Jeremy, this week we knew was going to be a fairly quiet stretch, but starting in July, we start getting into those other parts of the pattern there, my friend.
Yeah, and we had around, I would say, July 2nd to 10th. That was an area that would probably favor more like that western Atlantic area, possibly into around the Carolinas. That was just busy when we identified it later on last fall. Yeah. It just had several lows that were meandering in that area. And certainly some models have that look to it. Nothing all that strong right now. We're not looking at a sort of a fantasy GFS hurricane or anything like that, but a number of models are showing maybe a low here or there.
And looking at the specificity, it's like that around July 4th, we're watching that Carolina coast part of the pattern. We've seen hints of it on the different computer models, and we'll look at the computer models in a little bit. But for now, you can very clearly see we've got those data points there, meaning that starting around next week through the end of July, we're getting into a more active part of the pattern around land. So the whole pattern has been active out in the ocean, and we've seen like Cindy, for example. This is a really interesting thing, and we didn't even mention this when we were discussing Cindy, but using our long-range forecast technique, the Cindy part of the pattern over the weekend, Jeremy, you sent me a text message because you had gone back to case study and you kind of found some interesting information on that.
Yeah, almost every cycle we found a reflection of the low ending up by the Canadian Maritimes. So it's headed right into that spot. And also that might be when it would try to strengthen a little bit sort
Yeah.
of late in the game. So a lot of times what we are identifying is where these, whether they're ridges or troughs, kind of like to be in the various parts of the pattern,
Right.
and then where systems strengthen within that. So those are really what we are identifying, and
Right.
then we just project forward. So it's to us, it's not all that difficult anymore because some of these features, they're pretty obvious. We identify them, we project forward, but
Right.
it's just the initial thing. I would say October, November, that's when we're just laser focused. Then
Yeah.
we sort of try to figure out when they're returning. And then come February, we start crafting our hurricane forecast, and then it's issued every year on March the 1st. And pretty much we just leave it alone and see how it plays out.
And I love that. I love the ability to just leave it alone. So here we are. Next week, we're going to start to watch the Carolina coast. It's not a guarantee that you're going to get like a big bad hurricane, of course.